Hey, Bastish BF for 64K, and welcome to the second episode of Shoot 'em Up Decades. And welcome back. If you've never watched this show before, I take 3 different shoot 'em up games from 3 different decades and we check them out. And at the end we'll discuss what cool features each one of these games managed to bring to the genre. So for our first game we're going to jump back in time to when arcades were at their peak. U.N.Squadron was released in the arcades in 1989 by Capcom, who was one of the major players in the arcade scene at the time. 89 was right in the heart of their most productive arcade period, and the game lived up to the high standards brilliantly. Capcom was formed in 1979 and was a combination of a few companies set up by the founder, Kenzo Sugimoto. It eventually received the Capcom name in 1983. The name, if you didn't already know, is a shortened version of 2 words, Capsule Computers. Capcom, which the company came up with to describe the early arcade scene which they were a major player in. Arcades remained their primary format in the early days, but they eventually branched out into consoles with the release of the Famicom in 1984, and the rest, as they say, is history. Capcom wasn't new to the shoot 'em up genre at all, having already made notable games in the genre such as Legendary Wings and Forgotten Worlds, so they had good experience in this style, which was released on their powerhouse CPS arcade hardware that was used extensively during that period. The game was based on the Japanese manga called Area 88 and was renamed U.N.Squadron for Western audiences who were no doubt unfamiliar with that series. English versions of some of that series were released through Viz Comics, and I highly recommend you checking them out. They are pretty good reads. This is also a rare shoot 'em up for the time that actually has a bit of a story and plays out traditionally between the levels, and has a group of pilots trying to take down a secret terrorist group known as Project Fall. This game ticks all the horizontal shoot 'em up cliches while bringing the unique aspect of an energy bar instead of a one-hit kills or losing all your weapons, which was pretty much the standard for every shooter during this period. Being able to take a number of hits made the game way more accessible to casuals as well, but that didn't mean the game was easy. It's still a tough little bastard, but with the energy bar and the relatively short levels, it made it possible to at least survive for more than 5 minutes before slapping in another quarter. Being able to purchase weapons at the end of each level was very cool as well, and that had definitely been lifted from Capcom's previous shooter hit, Forgotten Worlds. Overall, there are 10 levels to blast through and 3 unique characters to choose from, straight out of the manga. Shin has forward fire only, but at a rapid pace. Maki's ones are slower but do way more damage, and Greg has small forward shot, but he also has a secondary low firing shot weapon that takes out ground targets. Choosing what style suits you is pretty tough, but Shin is my usual choice, having been a pretty well-rounded character. Each level is pretty short as previously mentioned, and ends with the traditional boss battle, taking the form of a giant tank, stealth bombers, castle fortresses, and many more other crazy things. The graphics are excellent and have that very unique CPS hardware look that is part anime, part 16-bit spritey goodness, and it still looks great even playing it now. It's complemented by a cool soundtrack by Manami Matsume, who was no slouch in the music department, having composed Mercs and Magic Sword soundtracks amongst many more at Capcom. We never got to see a proper sequel despite the game being very popular at the time, but Capcom's 1990 release called Carrier Airway is often considered the spiritual successor to this game, sharing more than a few similarities, combined with look and style that also makes it a must-play shooter. The easiest way probably to play this game now is picking up the excellent Super Famicom or Super NES versions, which are both extremely well-made arcade conversions. If you've never played this 1989 game, then there's no better time to dive into this often overlooked CPS system gem. And our next game for today, we're going to jump back to the console wars of the 90s and check out a much-loved classic. Aerofighters, which is known as Sonic Wings in Japan, was released in the arcades in 1992 by Video System, and we'll be looking at the Super NES version that was released a year later in 1993. Of note, the Super NES version is a variation on the arcade and is not a direct port. The developer Video System was founded in 1984 and were defunct by 2001. Their offices were in Kyoto, Japan. They primarily made games for the arcade scene, while also later they made console games on the Super NES and then the Neo Geo. Most of their games didn't leave Japan, and they are best known for the F1 Grand Prix series on the Super Famicom and obviously the Aerofighters series. Shin Nakamura, the designer of Aerofighters and many other Video Systems games, ended up leaving the company after Video System wanted to start developing the second and eventually third game in the series exclusively for the Neo Geo arcade system. Shin was fed up and he left, and he ended up founding Seiko, which is an excellent shoot-'em-up company, whose first game was the brilliant Samurai Aces, so it all worked out well for us shoot-'em-up fans. Aerofighters was a game I played a lot in the arcades initially, and it has all the vertical scrolling cliches intact. They were brought over to the Super NES version, with the rapid-fire destruction and the classic smart bomb intact. Character-wise, you pick the nation you want to represent, like the USA, Japan, Sweden and the UK, all with their own unique weapon styles. What's even more unique here is that each nation has two members, two different characters, one for player 1 and one for player 2, so it was clearly a game that was always designed for two-player action, and it also bumps up the character count to 8, which was a lot back then. The stages are also set by which character you choose, so there is an element of variation as you try out all the characters. The game sports 7 stages in total, with each having 2 parts, and the diversity in the stages is pretty good and gives it a great international flavor and feel. The graphics are also pretty well done, and the Super NES version does an excellent imitation of the arcade, as is the music and sound effects. This is a good shoot 'em up without being brilliant, but I wanted to highlight this series as I want to cover all 3 games eventually, and it's definitely worth playing if you're a fan of the traditional style shooter genre. And if you're wondering how to play this, probably emulation is your best bet at this point, as the Super NES version is extremely rare and super expensive. Don't even bother looking, you'll give yourself a heart attack. And for our third and final game for today, we're going to jump to a time when Microsoft and Sony completely dominated the home console scene. Castle Shikigami 2 was first released in the arcade in 2003 on Sega's Naomi arcade system by the company Alpha System, and in 2004 it was ported to the PS2, which is the version we're looking at today. Before we get to the game, let's check out Alpha System, the Japanese software company from Kumamoto, Japan. They were formed in 1988 and initially did games exclusively for NEC consoles like the PC Engine. They eventually branched out and worked on many handheld versions of Namco's Tales of RPG series before the Castle Shikigami trilogy. Even though Castle Shikigami 2 was the first time that the series was released under its original name in English, we did see the original on the PS2 as well, under the awfully changed name, Mobile Light Force 2, and the even more dismal US cover art, which I actually passed up before thinking it was some dodgy third-person budget game. Damn it. The story goes that this giant castle suddenly appears above Tokyo and triggers the battle between humans and gods. This is another well-made fun vertical shooter. It's a pretty good entry-level game for newbies to the genre. It does get a bit bullet helly, but totally manageable. First up, there's a massive selection of characters to choose from, 8 in total, each with their own unique magic styles, and each character has their own storyline as well, and the interactions with the bosses all differ accordingly. The game is also pretty easy to get into, and learning how to use the score system, which rewards you for being dangerous and getting close to incoming bullets without being hit. It's not a new concept, but this kudo system always reminds me of the risk-reward trope that I first saw in Metropolis Street Racer on the Dreamcast. The game is spread across 5 levels, with each level being split in 2 parts, with a mid-level and final boss for each. I really like the structure as it gives you a sense of how far you are in any given level. The graphics are really good, well animated, and complement the anime style of the game perfectly. Music and sound effects are also pretty good as well, but the voiceovers are a Resident Evil train wreck that are so bad they're good. The actors, or the people that they hired to do the voiceovers, don't seem to have a clue what they are talking about.
Hi, what a cute boy. Interested in my body, aren't you?
Or even the context of what is being said.
A, beaten and then get caught, or B, caught and then get beaten.
You're an idiot! Let me finish you!
and the translation is hilariously bad.
I am Dundian, keeping it a fool-free zone.
It actually makes the game better in my opinion. The gameplay and everything else is an absolute blast anyway, but having this extra layer of cheese brings tons of humor to the story, even though it was clearly unintentional.
I'm not taking excuses. I'm beating you down.
The European PS2 release has all the voiceovers removed, obviously due to some sort of quality control, which in my opinion is a bit of a shame. You should definitely check out the US version if you get a chance. In 2005, Alpha released the third and final game in the arcades, and it received an English Wii release in 2008. This is a cool fun shooter for the PS2 that's as fun to play as it is to witness the mad, unintentionally ridiculous dialogue. So why did I choose these three shoot 'em ups? Each one of them I think has something a little bit unique that's a little bit different, especially for the time. Number one, UN-Squadron. This one has an energy bar, which wasn't very common back then, so it made it a lot more easier to get into for anybody really. So it was a kind of an innovation I felt at the time. Secondly, it was based on a manga, so it gives the whole game a lot more character than you would usually see in a shoot 'em up at that time, or any time really. So it felt like a little bit of like its own little universe, and these characters were existing in it as opposed to just a random ship flying along and just shooting stuff up. I chose Aerofighters because of its massive cast of characters and the international flavor of it. All the levels are pretty diverse. I like all the different types of characters from all different countries. It made it feel like a little bit more of like an epic battle against something. And even though the Super Nintendo version wasn't a direct arcade port, it did such a great job of capturing the arcades so well, even in look and style, that I think it really deserves a second look. And lastly, I chose Castle Shikigami 2 because of the ridiculous story. It is like so much fun to play this game and witness the absolutely terrible translation that was made of this game. Now obviously the reason it's here is because it is a really good shoot 'em up gameplay wise. It's super fun to play. I haven't played like a shoot 'em up that is just like absolute fun, like so much fun as this one is. But the English translation is so bad, it just has to be seen to be believed. And it's so much fun. You really should play through with all the characters, or at least sample them, because you're going to be in for like some of the most hilarious dialogue you have ever seen in a game of all time. And that's a wrap for another episode of Shoot 'em Up Decades. Thanks for joining me, Bastish B at 64K. If you could like and subscribe, that'll be greatly appreciated, and I'll see you next time. Cheers!